Does your underground infrastructure show signs of aging? Have your joints become offset or severely separated? Perhaps there are other points of concern for infiltration and exfiltration in your pipeline. Our product will eliminate leaks and help prevent the formation of destructive sinkholes. This product is the HydraTite Internal Pipe Joint Seal, a simple solution installed over joints or points of concern that could allow for infiltration or exfiltration in your pipeline. What is HydraTite? What can it do? How is it installed? We discuss all of this and more in the video. But before we start, like and subscribe for more content like this. First, what is the HydraTite Seal? It's a simple product comprised of stainless steel retaining bands and an EPDM rubber seal that is manufactured with 4 ribs on the opposite side from where the steel bands sit. The steel bands press the ribs into the interior surface of the pipe, creating a watertight seal. Now, what all can the HydraTite Seal do? Let's discuss its customizability and flexibility. As long as the pipe is structurally sound and is large enough to allow for man entry, HydraTite could be the perfect solution to eliminate leaks. HydraTite is manufactured in 3 different widths. The larger, wider seals are utilized when the offset or separation is more severe. But what if the damaged portion stretches beyond what an extra wide or double wide seal can accommodate? Well, the HydraTite seal can be interlocked in such a way that they cover a larger surface area. So the rubber comes in 3 different widths and can be interlocked. But what about the retaining bands? These too can be custom made. While the retaining bands are most frequently produced in a single or 2-piece band, we understand that certain circumstances may require the bands be made in even more pieces, such as a small entry point or bends in the pipe that restrict movement. HydraTech can manufacture these bands in 3, 4, or even more pieces to address these concerns. Okay, but let's talk specifics. What kind of applications can HydraTite be used in? The short answer? A lot. HydraTite has been used in potable and non-potable applications. We have installed the seal in metal pipes, concrete pipes, and elliptical pipes. Although additional materials may need to be shipped with the basic seal, the HydraTite seal can be installed in irregular shaped pipes, box culverts, and corrugated pipes. HydraTite can also be used as an end seal to terminate a liner, fortifying that liner against water backtracking underneath. HydraTite can function as a replacement for failing expansion joints as well. Finally, HydraTite's installation is not hindered by standing water. In fact, HydraTite has been installed entirely underwater. So we now know what HydraTite can do, but how is it installed? Firstly, let's focus on the process for the circular or elliptical installation, as these are the most common. Step 1 is surface prep. The interior surface of the pipe needs to be smooth and uniform to allow HydraTite to seal properly. That means chipping away any buildup minerals, clearing out debris, and filling in indentations near the joint or point of repair. The goal is to make sure that the ribs of the rubber make constant contact with the interior surface of the pipe all the way around. Next, we get the rubber and lubricate the ribs and the channels where the steel bands will sit. Then we position the rubber so that the joint or point that we're repairing is behind the center of the seal. Make sure the ribs are in constant contact with the host pipe all the way around. Make sure the rubber runs with the pipe and is not turned or distorted in any way. Work out the bumps like this. If you have trouble pressing down a large bump, work this bump into 2 smaller bumps. This will make the installation process easier and more successful. Now grab the retaining bands. Construct the steel bands using the bolts, but keep the bolts loose enough to allow for expansion and contraction of the bands. Now slide the retaining bands into their designated channels in the rubber. When positioning the expansion points, keep this in mind. Expanding in standing water is less than ideal, and holding the expander over your head gets tiresome. Keeping that in mind, generally avoid positioning the expansion points at the invert or crown of the pipe. Now grab a shim and bend it slightly. Work it behind the retaining band. You want to position it so that the middle of the shim is at the gap created by the expansion point. Ensure that every expansion point in both bands has a shim behind the steel band. For all but the last expansion point in each band, expand until the gap created can hold a 1-inch placeholder wedge. Do this at each expansion point until you reach the last expansion point in that band. For one-piece bands, you can skip the placeholder wedge. Now at the final expansion point, we need to bring the retaining bands up to pressure. The required pressure is determined by 3 things: the diameter of the hose pipe, the material of the hose pipe, and the type of steel the retaining bands are made of. Once you reach the pressure at this expansion point, we're going to seed the band. And that just means we're going to tap a few times around the band in a star-shaped pattern. Remember, only tap on the band. We're not going to tap on the expander head. As you tap, watch the pressure. It will likely dip. Maintain pressure, pumping it up to regain lost pressure. And when you find a spot that causes the pressure to go down, focus your attention on that spot. Tap around the location until the pressure stops dropping. Eventually the pressure should stabilize, and you will be able to tap around the entire band without the pressure dropping. And now, we will find a wedge that will fit snugly into the newly created gap in the retaining band. Turn the wedge so that the curve of the wedge matches the curve of the pipe, and the rounded corner of the wedge goes into the gap first. Remember, don't use a loose wedge. If one size is too small and the next size up is too big, increase the pressure slightly to accommodate the larger wedge. If the pressure is nearing the maximum suggested pressure, spend additional time seating the band to relieve some of the pressure. Now that this band is locked in place, repeat the process on the other band. Finally, tighten the bolts. And that's it! You've successfully completed the basic HydraTite installation. Alright, let's dig into the installation process of irregular shapes, or box seals, as this process does differ from the basic installation. Step 1 is the same. Prepare the surface of the joint or point of repair, removing buildup, debris, and filling voids. Offset joints are brought flush with concrete filler. Pro stick or concrete may be applied to the corners to help the rubber run smoothly over the bend. Now at step 2 is where things start to get a bit different. We're going to mark out the edge of the seal and where it's going to lay in the pipe to ensure that the center of the rubber lays directly over the joint or point of repair. Step 3, we're going to mark where the anchors are going to go. The first ones we'll mark are 2 inches away from the corner forms, or where the steel begins to run straight. Make sure they're an inch past where the edge of the rubber will be. Repeat until each bend has 2 marks on either side. For the rest of the anchors, we want to ensure a somewhat consistent distance. The distance needs to be less than 9 inches, and anchors can be shifted slightly if the exact location can't be drilled due to rebar or some other complicating factor. When shifting an anchor, it is important that the distance between the neighboring anchors and the one you're moving never grows more than 9 inches. Once all the marks are made on this side, mirror the marks on the other side of the repair. Anchors must be across from one another and not staggered. Step 4, we drill at the marked points. Each hole must have a minimum depth of 2 5/8 inches. Some projects require additional holes be drilled for the corner forms. Step 5, inject hydrophilic sealant into the holes and then insert the anchors. If you have corner forms that require anchors, install those now. When hammering in the anchors, there is a possibility that the hammer will damage the threads of the anchors or deform them in such a way that the nuts can't be put in place. You can avoid damaging them by temporarily positioning the nuts atop the anchors, and then driving them into place with a hammer. Step 6. Construct the bands, ensuring that the bolts are loose enough to allow the bands to shift. Now for step 7, we're going to start working with the rubber. First, lubricate the ribs and the channels, and then position the rubber over the repair as marked out earlier. Step 8. Positioning the retaining bands. Take your first retaining band and focus on the invert of the pipe. Once you get the steel positioned over the rubber at the bottom of the pipe, begin to work the rubber around the steel. Once the steel is inside the rubber, move it to the center of that rubber. This will make positioning the second steel band easier. Now, position the second band into the closest channel. After that's in place, move the band that is currently in the middle of the rubber to the far channel. Step 9 may not apply to your project, but some projects will include installing corner forms like these behind the rubber. Slide those into place now. Pro stick or concrete may have been put in place earlier, or maybe you used anchored corner forms. Step 10. Slightly bend and insert the shims. Again, the middle of the shim should be aligned with the gap of the expansion point. Repeat for all the expansion points in both bands. Step 11. Add the anchor plates. And then put on the washers and nuts. You can skip any anchor plates that would complicate the expansion process by covering the expansion points. We'll add those in later. Step 12. Expansion. Pick a side and go to the first expansion point. Expand until you can fit a placeholder wedge into the newly created gap. Then go to the second expansion point and expand until you reach a pressure that is between 1,500 psi and 1,800 psi. If this side only has one expansion point, you can skip the placeholder wedge and bring the expansion point up to pressure. Insert a snugly fitting wedge here now. Step 13 is just repeating the last step on all the sides of each band until the bands are all locked in place. The next step is to replace the missing anchor plates, the ones we left off for expansion earlier. Now tighten down the anchors and tighten the bolts in the bands. The final step is trimming down the anchors to ensure a minimal profile of the seal. And just like that, the irregular shaped HydraTite seal is installed. Here are a few installation situations you might find yourself in. Some jobs require that the seals be air tested, and these seals are manufactured with a test valve. After the seal is installed, use an Allen wrench to open the test valve and pump 5 pounds of pressure behind the seal. Then spray a water and dish soap solution around the edge of the seal. Watch for the formation of bubbles. If there are no bubbles, the seals pass the test. However, if bubbles are appearing, you'll need to reseed the bands, re-expand the bands, and try to get a larger wedge into that gap. Then pump air behind the seal again, spray with soapy water, and watch for bubbles. If the bubbles persist, you'll need to uninstall and make doubly sure that the surface of the pipe was properly prepared for installation. Then reinstall and air test again. In some situations, you might need to install the HydraTite seal with a backing plate. Situations such as severe separation, extensive voids between the ribs, or when the HydraTite seal is functioning as a replacement for an expansion joint. For installations with a backing plate, you follow the main installation process but only install one retaining band. Then fold the rubber over that band and push the backing plate up against the rubber. Then fold the rubber back down over the backing plate, and now you can install the second band. In circumstances with high head pressure, you might need additional bands. These bands are installed between the two main bands and positioned in such a way that the retaining band pushes the rubber into the host pipe, not the joint or point of repair. Okay, let's talk safety. When handling the expander head, you'll need to watch where your fingers go. You need to make sure they don't end up in the gap when the pressure is released. Or, if you're handling the pump, you need to be aware of the person who is handling the head and where their fingers are. Always communicate when you intend to release pressure when another person is holding the head. When carrying the expander, it's important to hold it by the head and the pump. Don't carry it by the hose. It's not designed for that, and you can damage it. Let's run through a few troubleshooting scenarios. What if the head of the expander doesn't open? While using the pump, make sure that the end with the hose is at least 3 inches lower than the other end. That way, gravity works with you as you pump. You may find it easier if you hold the pump like this. Open up the pump and make sure that the oil isn't low. Add vegetable oil if needed. If that doesn't work, detach, clean, and reattach all couplings in the hose. That means on the pump side and the head side. If you're still having trouble getting the head to expand, take the top portion of the head, remove the bolts, disassemble and clean. Then lubricate all the nooks and crannies with WD-40. Remember, we're only taking apart and rebuilding the top portion. That should resolve the problem. What if the gauge isn't moving as I pump? Lightly tap on the gauge, and if that fails, remove and clean the gauge, then reattach. If even that doesn't work, you'll need to replace the gauge. Okay, but what if the head is stuck open in the expansion point? For this situation, you'll need to tap around the band to release pressure. Tap the band and not the head. The next option is to detach, clean, and reattach all couplings in the hose. Lastly, you can try giving one additional pump, slowly releasing the pressure, then giving one more pump, and quickly releasing pressure. That should take care of it. Okay, but what if I keep losing pressure while I seat the band? This usually means that you need to re-clean the surface of the pipe. Make sure that there are no indentations, and then reinstall. What if the expander head is popping out of the expansion point? Make sure that the expander head's teeth are clean, and that there's no dirt in the expansion point. If that was not the issue, rotate the retaining band so the expansion point is at the bottom of the pipe, and you can use your own weight to help keep the expander in place while expanding. If that doesn't work, you may have overexpanded this expansion point. Return to a previous expansion point in the band and attempt to insert a larger wedge. Then return to the final expansion point and attempt to bring it up to pressure. If the problem persists, you're going to have to remove the bolt that's closest to the expander head. After this point has been brought to pressure and locked in place with the wedge, the bolt will need to be added back. Now you know the ins and outs of HydraTite, what it is, what it does, and how it's installed. If you found this information helpful, like and subscribe for more information about underground infrastructure repair from HydraTech.